it requires representation, and the other side can just deal with it. And eventually, we need to go that route. I'd like to go that route. The whole topic that it's the wild, wild west up there. I think that's like we just perpetuate that image, and that's a defeatist attitude, in my opinion. I think that we do need to bring higher standards and professionalism to that area. If that is the case, it's like wild, wild west, not a lot. Why aren't agents doing things like professional?
I think it's more like a risk assessment when you consider the law. I think that you open yourself up to more risk because you are technically practicing law license most of the time. But we're going to talk about it. So, I have here some contracts before we get started, just so that you guys have. They might not be necessary for people that do a decent amount of deals in. So you guys probably already know contracts, like this is more for somebody who's never done a deal in New Hampshire, or is very new, is unsure. This makes it clear the process. I apologize if I missed some at a time. My son is not happy about being dropped off here.
Oh, we're fun people.
And he's got cookies in the other room, he's watching Mickey Mouse, so he'll be okay. That's what you can imagine was more. Yeah, so here, you shared. If you want to share, just kind of take a turn, we'll kind of just do like a snake. What your experience is, how long you've had your New Hampshire license.
Okay. Don't have my license. I'm actually very interested in that. This is a review course that I'm doing.
Yep.
So I'm just waiting for my kids to go after school so I can study it.
Yeah.
And go for the exam. But I have been doing real estate in that about 2 years now. Awesome.
Yeah.
You're up.
2 years ago. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Coming in 2 years, you've been hitting it's been a crazy kind of 2 year
About the
market.
same, yeah.
Yeah, it's changing now, right? Like,
It's the seasonal change I find is happening.
yeah, I feel like it's a little different now when I first started. But it's been a good 2 years.
So I got my New Hampshire license back in October, but I didn't really do anything till February, March. That's when I started kind of working part-time and kind of been doing that. It's kind of hard to, I was full stay-at-home mom, try to transition to this.
Yeah, it's hard.
So it's been slow and I'm just learning as I go along. Haven't had much experience other than what I get a lot from the team that I'm in. But yeah,
What team you on?
with Keith,
Oh, perfect.
yeah.
I know, I don't really know enough about the ins and outs of the office. I will learn.
I don't either, so.
Yeah, I really,
But yeah,
so,
pretty much it.
cool.
I'm Lisa. I got my license in New Hampshire in December of last year, and my last license in October. But I haven't done any transactions in New Hampshire yet.
Okay.
I've been close, but I'm not really focusing as much in New Hampshire.
Yeah, that's
Sometimes I'm thinking whether I should have.
It's
I
your,
think that was-
no, it's absolutely a benefit because you never know. I mean, in my opinion, you sell one transaction in New Hampshire covers essentially your cost. Do one a year. It'll be worth it. It's definitely,
Yeah.
in long term, I saw an increase in my business, probably because I live in Methuen and I kind of, the Merrimack Valley area is kind of my area. But I don't like to limit myself to the local agent thing. I just really don't believe it. But from growing up in the Merrimack Valley area, there's a lot of people that hop the border. So
Yeah.
I was able to benefit
But
from
I'm
that
just
immediately.
curious, how do sellers of garbage work with realtors that are actually based in Massachusetts. Like, they feel
They don't care. I mean, I don't care. When I'm working with a co-broke, I'm thinking, me and you are buddies. We're both trying to make money. We're both trying to make our clients happy. And we're working together to do that. And when you're licensed in Kentucky, I don't
Yeah.
care. But, so whenever you guys have a second, if you could just come up, grab one of each. Anything that has multiple pages are stacked, so it's easier to run it just one page for each agenda. I put it in order there from left to right on this side.
That's
Yes. Yep. Purchases goes on top, everything else behind. I would have stapled it, but I have a stupid iPad and it won't cooperate with the printer. I'll move the chips on my face out of the way. Okay. So while you guys are closing, I'll tell you a little bit about myself for anyone who doesn't know. My name is Sarah. I grew up in a real estate home. Both my parents were agents. Did both licensed in Mass and New Hampshire. I was lucky enough to kind of observe them in New Hampshire before getting into it. So I think that's why my comfortability level there is a little bit higher than agents that start out in Mass. And that's really that. I had my Mass license for a year and then I got my New Hampshire license immediately after. I've been selling for 7 years. I was at Lair with them. Now I'm here, happy to be here, love it here. Anyone have any questions for me really? I don't think, probably not. Probably not. Okay, cool. Shoot it out, shoot it out. I would like the class to be, when I do these classes, I want them to be interactive. So if you have questions, jump out and ask me. If I feel as though, if I say, oh, we're gonna touch on that, I'll let you know, but I don't like boring classes. And if you're bored, I want to know. So, but there's also gonna be a big portion of this class that's Q&A. You have experience, I don't know, you have some experience. So anyone that has some shared experience or questions during that Q&A period, you know, maybe some of your questions get answered. I would be even open to hearing some of your own experiences, you know, that you think would be helpful to share for some of the newer agents in here that are considering or have their New Hampshire license. I really think that in any class that I teach, we're all here to make each other better. And if I can share my horror story and stop you from having to endure the same, I want to do that. So I'm starting this here with this New Hampshire 101, and we're not in Mass anymore. So anything you know about real estate, pretend you don't know it. I think that a lot of times people get stuck on, well, in Mass we do it this way, where it's just think of like you're in a different country. New Hampshire is similar but different. There's definitely a little bit more of a risk to yourself and your license as far as that. So, but it is also a disclosure state. And if you're doing your job in an honest way with integrity, you won't have a problem. There's always going to be somebody, like I saw the Janet Faulkner mentioned, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when someone's going to come after you. People are going to be disgruntled. This is a highly emotional process overall. So people are going to get upset. And as long as you're doing your job with integrity, you have nothing to worry about, especially where we have an amazing leadership team here that will absolutely have your back. Do your job with integrity, be honest, and you'll be okay. New Hampshire is a disclosure state. So when I'm working in New Hampshire, at the top of my mind is being brutally honest with my clients. I'm like that anyway. I'm very direct. I'm really not about the closing. I'm about the relationship. So you want to be honest. When you're in New Hampshire, especially you want to be honest, because there's very little protection for your buyer. Whereas in Mass, we have Title V, we have certain things that need to be met ahead of time. So we really are relying on the honesty of the seller. And I can share some experiences where that seller wasn't honest and kind of the situation it led my clients to be in, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I don't want to scare you guys. So what we're discussing today is, like I was just saying, Mass and New Hampshire are two different states and have two completely different processes, requirements, etc. I'm going to show you a bird's eye view of the process to start. So I feel as though if you don't have an understanding of what the process looks like from above, when you're navigating it in it, it's very hard to understand what's going on. So I've kind of laid out the process as best I can. If anyone has any questions about the process or anything like that, or want to throw in their 2 cents, or hey, if I've got something wrong and you think it needs correcting, definitely let me know. But I'm going to do the process how I experience it. Again, I'm going to go over the attorney involvement in Mass versus New Hampshire, because I think that's where the biggest difference is here. And I think that's where, when you're in Mass, you kind of get stuck on that because we're responsible as agents in New Hampshire for a lot more than we're used to be. If you're used to closing transactions in Mass and then you go in New Hampshire, there's less regulation, but there's more on you. So you have to be aware of that. I'm also going to talk about the disclosure process in New Hampshire because it is different than in Mass, and then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A. So this is the process to start. So the biggest difference from the jump in New Hampshire is that there is no contract to purchase. In Mass, we have a contract to purchase. We negotiate, we have our clients super happy, and then we pass along to an attorney to write that purchase and sales agreement based on that contract to purchase. In New Hampshire, that's not it. If you look in front of you, that's a boilerplate purchase and sales agreement. That's your offer. That is the equivalent of your contract to purchase. It just cuts that right out. It goes directly to purchase and sales agreement. The scary part is that that's something that an attorney would normally do for you. I know that there are some agents in Mass that also write their purchase and sales agreements, but I don't. I like to take advantage of the fact that there's an attorney involved because, and also, I also want to stress with this, it's very important that you're networking in real estate. And when you have access to attorneys that you have a working relationship with, they're going to help you, you know, and that's really who I rely on when I'm doing these transactions in New Hampshire. If I'm uncomfortable at all, or if I don't know, I'm making a phone call to an attorney that I've built a relationship with. They're not going to bill me because if they need a market analysis on an estate property, I'm going to give that to them. If they have any questions about real estate, they know they can call me. So they're comfortable answering my questions, obviously when they have time. So that's also something you want to keep in mind when you're in New Hampshire. It's on you, but the good news is that it's on you. So if you have a relationship with an attorney that you can bounce things off of, you know, it's helpful, especially when it comes to the language, because we don't practice law. We have a real estate license. We don't have a bar license. So if I have a question about where this language is getting a little bit weird, I don't feel comfortable, it's getting more than just like, you know, seller concessions or whatever, I'll go to an attorney and say, hey, this is what's happening. Could you give me some language for this? And usually they're happy to do it, you know, and then eventually keep those. That's why I keep anything that I have, because the situation is more than likely going to pop up again. So if that situation pops up again, I have a reference point for when I've already spoken to that attorney. So it's not like you're going to be calling the attorney for every single deal. You know, things happen pretty predictably most of the time. What was that?
And they can still be one closing.
Yes, they can be. If you're on the buyer side. If you're on the seller side, that's where it gets a little like you have to rely on your network. On the buyer side, it's great because you have a closing attorney. And that's really where I want you guys to find some peace in that, because it's like scary. I know that a lot of the feedback I got when I talked about doing this class was the fear of, you know, I'm not an attorney and how is this going to get me? Is this going to get me in hot water? You do have the closing attorney to bounce things off of. And sometimes the closing attorney, it depends on what they want to do. Sometimes closing attorneys would prefer to write the addendum. So they'll write it and send it to you and then you just send it out. Most of the time, that's not the case. You're going to have to write it. But so the offer in New Hampshire is the purchase and sales agreement. The purchase and sales has no expiration unless stated in the additional provisions. I wanted to add that because I know that stresses people out. In Mass, the contract to purchase is only good for a certain amount of time. It's clearly stated. So if your offer doesn't get accepted, the offer expires and you don't have to worry about it. And I know Andy Consoli does a good job talking about this in his continuing ed classes. It's a gap. It's a gap in New Hampshire that probably should be filled. I don't know why they don't add an expiration to the purchase and sales agreement, but at the same time, it's probably because it's based off of it and it wouldn't expire for 30 days anyway if it was accepted.
I write in my expiration.
Yes, you can. Yeah. So it's tough because you want to do like an expiration that's lengthy enough where we're in a market that, you know, someone's having to compete, and you'll learn that as you get more experience with the newer agents in here, you'll kind of know like what's a reasonable period of expiration. But that's something you want to keep in mind, because if you don't, I'm not saying it will happen, but it absolutely could. If someone has a deal together and then it falls apart, they could sign a purchase and sales agreement and then they have a contract. And then sure, you know, seems insane, but then your clients are going to have to go to court, and that's just something that you want to keep in mind. So you want to make sure that you're writing those expirations in there. It really depends on the situation. Like if I have a house that's been sitting for 2 months and they've done several reductions, I'm going to pressure them. I'm going to want that expiration fairly soon, within 48 hours, like, or maybe even 24 hours. Whereas if I'm going and it's a bump and open house and I know they're going to have an offer deadline and I know that it's going to be, you know, they're going to probably take some time, I'll give them a few days. But you kind of just want to see, and you can call and have that conversation. Don't be afraid to have a conversation with your co-broker. They're your friend. Yes, you're working together. Yes, it's a competitive field, but you want to have a discussion with them because you want to provide what their client wants. So you call and say, hey, you know, how long do you think they're going to need? And then you could write that in there. Sometimes you're going to get that agent that's like, I don't know, you know, if that happens, that happens. But then you can just do what your best guess would be. And then if you feel as though, okay, it's running out and I still haven't heard from them and they're still deciding, you can just resend it with an updated expiration date. So after purchase and sales, you know, great, you've submitted your purchase and sales, offer's been accepted, it's wonderful, yes. We're gonna be going on to the deposit and the inspection. So you're gonna give your deposit, that makes the purchase and sales binding. I know that there's some back and forth on whether that's the case or not. It's my understanding that the contract's not binding until there's a check, but I've also heard that that's not the case. So that's for the attorneys to deal with. But for your client's best interest, if you're on the buyer side, you wanna collect that check. For your client's best interest on the seller side, you want to get that check because it's really just a piece of paper. And you know, while our job is to sell the property. If their situation is caught up in court, they can't sell the property. So whether or not you want to be on top of that check, get it immediately as soon as you can. And so I wanted to also note that during this inspection period in New Hampshire, there's absolutely no Title V. There's no requirement for septic or sewer. I've sold a home that had a completely non-functioning septic before. The buyer knew. Again, disclosure is everything. And whatever you say about disclosure in New Hampshire, if it's on the phone, follow it up with a text, follow it up with an email, because it's going to matter. It's going to matter that you've made them aware of that.
What about the lender?
See, I had a conversation with my client and said, if you want to purchase this home, you absolutely can. The lender is not going to want to know if the septic doesn't work because they're not going to give you the money. So if you're comfortable knowing the crap you're stepping in, literally, then you can, you know, move forward. However, know that this septic doesn't work. There's a septic map here. They've fully told us it doesn't work anymore. They've had a map drawn up, which is a value of a couple of grand. It was nice of them to do. And my client was totally fine with it. She said, okay, nope, I want it. I love the home. It was one of those homes I'm selling that's just confusing. That's like, I don't even know why you want to buy this house, but you really want to, so I'm gonna help you buy it, but I'm just telling you right now.
You don't have to.
Oh, great. No, you do not have to. And the lender does not want to know if they want to close it. So in the best interest of everyone involved, if the buyer has a full understanding of what they're getting themselves into, they shouldn't tell their lender. And it's a matter of them getting their loan. If they want to tell the lender, they can, but I can tell you right now, they're not going to get the money. So, huh?
It's not more.
I mean, I've talked to my lender about it, and it's kind of like a on you kind of thing. I know. I don't know what I don't know. And it's like, okay, great. So I also, in that specific instance, had my client call me, you know, 3 weeks after closing and sending me pictures of her trying to do the septic herself. And she called and said, Sarah, the septic doesn't work. And I said, yes, you're right. It absolutely does not. And it's been reiterated 1,001 times. We had a septic inspector out there, 2 separate occasions. I have several emails making you very clear that the septic does not work. So that's where that disclosure piece matters, because if it's in writing. If she wanted to really be aggravated and regret what she did, you know, I have it very well documented that I was hesitant through the entire process and made it clear to her the risk that she was taking. It didn't come of anything. I think she was just frustrated. I think sometimes as the agent, you're a punching bag, and that's just part of the job. They're going to be upset. They're going to be confused. They're not going to know what's going on. And that's kind of, you know, you're going to be the face. No one goes and sees, I mean, maybe some, but no one goes and sees their lender. You're the only person in the whole transaction that they're having a face-to-face everyday kind of, not every day, but regular relationship with. So if there are any issues after the fact, you're going to hear from them. But that's, again, where disclosure is very important. And the septic inspection is at the cost of the buyer. Right now in this market, it's very popular to waive inspection. We've obviously had a few classes on why that's not a good idea. I refuse to waive a septic inspection because I've had homes that were built, you know, in 2010 that have a septic fail. I love it when the septic fails though. It's my favorite. I like jump for joy because when they have to remarket that property, they're going to have to say the septic failed. So realistically, your client's more than likely, unless they don't have the means to do it, they're more than likely going to get a new septic out of the deal. So and it's almost better when it fails versus finding an issue, but it's functioning, because if the seller can just come back and say, well, it's functioning, so kick rocks. And in this market, your buyer's going to have to eat that. So I would strongly encourage, you can waive a home inspection if your client's adamant about it, they feel strongly about it, never waive a septic inspection. It doesn't matter how old the home is. If someone doesn't maintain a septic properly, it's not going to last. The tank will, but the leach field won't. And that's like a $12,000 item. So, and that's on the lower end of things. If it's like a larger home, you know, there might even be more. So where in Massachusetts, at this point in the process, we would have had our contract to purchase, we would have had our home inspection, and now we would be involving the attorneys to say, hey, you know what, we've negotiated some items from the inspection, here you go. And then they write the purchase and sales agreement. In New Hampshire, our purchase and sales agreement is already done. So what we're doing is adding an addendum to note what is basically, you know, what are we changing? What have we negotiated? And that's where I have, you'll see in that packet, the purchase and sales agreement, and underneath, I think I did it in order. I did the first one was the inspection item. So this could be the inspection items I want to take care of, seller concessions. This one is a little bit weird and I want to show you guys because this is where I would consult an attorney or somebody in leadership or somebody, because when you're putting items into a purchase and sales agreement, it can affect the appraisal. So that's something that I had to struggle with here, but this property did not appraise out. It appraised $40,000 under, and the furniture didn't make a difference. So that was that. But so okay, at this point in the process, we've had our home inspection, everything's great. We've come to an agreement. We have our addendum for our inspection items. Now, the second deposit, how I write the purchase and sales, how I fill it in. I don't like to say I wrote it. It's a pre-filled thing. Attorneys wrote this. I'm just filling in the blanks for what works for my clients. How I would put it would be that the second deposit would be delivered at upon a satisfactory home inspection, satisfactory to the buyer. Because just like in Mass, if for any reason their inspection doesn't pan out, they don't like it, or if they just have cold feet and are like, I don't know if this is the house for me, they can still pull out because of the inspection. Sure. Oh, yes, you can ask.
Because I think that whole part is one of the things I wanted to hear you explain, which was whether you can, like, so I had one, we're talking inspection, paragraph 14. Yep. It does say, 14A does say buyers shall have the option at buyer's home inspection to terminate this agreement and all deposits shall be returned, which is very much like
Mass.
Mass.
Yep.
But I have had people describe to me that up in New Hampshire, that you had to do B here, which is that you have to say why you're pulling out, and they have the option of negotiating what it is, that you had to give some reason under one of your inspections.
No,
So no.
you don't. I mean, I'm sure that they'll ask. Because there's so much gray area, you can get pushed around if you're not like stern. You have to be assertive. You don't want to be disrespectful. You don't want to be nasty, but be assertive. And don't feel bad about being assertive, because we're in real estate and our job is to manipulate a situation to best do what's best for our client. So you have to be assertive. And if I were to say, absolutely not, no. And I'm not giving you a copy of the report. They just don't want it. I mean, if they really push for it, I'll give them a copy of the report, but they can't. In either way, if someone were to push back at me and say, oh, well, I want a reason or I'm not releasing you, I would say, okay, well, then you're not going to sell the house, because if you're not going to release me from the contract, these people don't want to buy anymore, or whatever the situation is, whatever. You kind of want to discuss that with your client. I've also had feedback from an attorney where they'll suggest and like forfeiting the initial deposit, which I never, ever recommend. I never do, unless someone's blatant. Like if my client's like, I just don't want to buy it anymore, and we're past, or I waive my inspection, and it's like, well, then that's on you. You're going to lose your deposit. But if it's a matter of someone pushing me because they feel as though they need a reason, they don't need a reason. It's for any reason. It's just unsatisfactory. That's why when I put, if you see on section 3, it says that the second deposit will be delivered on or before, upon satisfactory home inspection to buyer. So that upon satisfactory home inspection is really subject to what my client finds to be satisfactory.
We did kind of the same Mass mentality, which was, it's for information only, but unless.
And that's tough too.
Unless something's found that's 20,000,
Yeah, a dollar amount, yeah.
Over something. So they said, okay, if that's true though, as long as if you will, if you're getting receipts to show that it's more than 10,000.
Yeah, if you're doing a dollar amount like that.
So the whole negotiation process, he's like, cross out A and my seller will do it, because it is.
Yeah.
Not gonna leave for no reason. It's cool.
Yes.
Well, I think what's interesting, on that paragraph 14, the last sentence says, if the results of any inspections therein reveal significant issues or defects which were not previously disclosed to buyer.
Well, because New Hampshire is a disclosure state.
Correct. So you can't just say, oh, I don't like the inspection results. You have to have a reason that's not been disclosed to you.
They,
what the documents are.
if it hasn't been disclosed to you, but if it's been, if the seller didn't know and you didn't know, and there's just like an item, or if it's
But hasn't been
overwhelming the amount, because you can even just say the amount of work that needs to be done. It could be a bunch of little things, but the amount of work that needs to be done by client. And this is where the attorneys come in. If there's a dispute at this level, I would involve an attorney. And if the attorney doesn't want to get involved, the attorney doesn't want to get involved. But if it's to the point where someone's challenging me on getting out of a contract because of a home inspection, I'm gonna say, listen, you need to talk to the attorney.
Where's the due diligence part on here, like if it was a sex offender?
Oh, that's on,
I mean, I know paragraph 15 is due diligence, but it doesn't say.
So in the disclosure, I think that would reference the property disclosure.
So is there a sex offender that you want on there?
No.
No?
But they're in mass, you can go to the police and, you know, under Megan's law and then decide to say, oh, we're not moving forward because you don't even have to say mass, but it was because there was a sex offender next door.
So there is, I would have to write, I would guess if you wanted to write that in, you could write that in, but this is where there's a lot of gray in New Hampshire. So if you were to get to that point, that's where I would be calling an attorney and saying, what do you want, how do you want me to move forward? Or if they were concerned about that up front, I would say, okay, then we're gonna have to find a way to write this into the contract because it's very gray. I don't know if that would cover under home inspection. I don't know if that would be, there's also in the due diligence section where the restrictive covenants, stuff like that, it's not noted there. So that's a gray area question. And that's where I try, and it sounds so bad, I try not to think too much when I'm in New Hampshire. If it's an issue, I'll kind of cross that bridge when I get to it. But there's a lot of gray in New Hampshire and there's very little to no guidance. Like even on the purchase and sales, I know that people have petitioned the boards up there to add an expiration date to the purchase and sales agreement and they just won't. I don't know why, they just won't. But that's a good question.
If you don't want to steer them, so maybe you could put on your other inspection, you know, police and town hall. Or
Yeah, you could add that. I mean, and in this,
Not to interrupt.
no, I like the conversation.
I like that you should add something to that. It's not specific to the
To the
bounds of
buyer.
the property. To the bounds of the property, if you look at inspections before.
Right.
So that would be something that's beyond the scope of a physical inspection of the property.
Yeah.
So
I think it would be more part of 15 due diligence in that section. And that's where, again, you have to tailor to your client. If my client I knew that was something that they were going to be doing for every property. And honestly, most people I feel like would do that before they looked at it. I think that if it were me in that situation, I would say, listen, if you're interested in that, which you obviously should be, that's a huge thing, you know, look at that ahead of time before we go see the property.
I would say that. I hear your comments that there's a lot of gray area, but I think what you might be witnessing is a lack of appreciation for what's in writing here
Yes.
and what should be followed.
Yeah.
That agents are sloppy.
Yes.
Because this absolutely says that you're not getting out of a home inspection unless it's for an undisclosed matter.
See,
Period. And I would hold you to that. I'd say, no, we disclosed the roof to you, so bring that second deposit, or otherwise we're suing.
that's happened. I mean, it's definitely happened.
That's what it is.
But then it's like, okay, the roof, like at what extent is it leaking? That's where we had that conversation in that class with the home inspector.
I'm not being difficult. I'm just
No,
saying-
you're not being difficult at all. Not at all. It's
I think the
absolutely,
gray area
because this is
comes
what
by
you're gonna
agents
run
sloppy.
into. Ron is what you're going to be
You're gonna be
challenged
up
with.
against me who reads every 8 pages of this.
Yes.
Like, No. Section 7, sentence 5 says this, and this is what we're doing.
Yes.
Oh, no, well, my client doesn't feel okay. Okay, well, tell your client they're a big boy and they need to sign this. This is the deal.
Yeah.
Like, this is real estate. But I find agents out there that are sloppy, they're loosely goosey.
Yes.
And that's where the gray area comes in.
More than likely. It's also because there's if you're used to practicing in Mass and you're not used to practicing in New Hampshire, you rely heavily on an attorney. You know, you have nothing to do with the purchase and sales agreement in Massachusetts. That is 1000% and it's nice because I do a lot of business in New Hampshire and then I get in Mass and I'm like, oh, there's so much less to do here. It's like, it's just the attorney is involved. But these are things you're gonna run into. Of people saying, no, you're not getting out of it. And at that point, if I was in that situation and it was subject to like, my clients, they just got cold feet, they might run into an issue where their deposit's being challenged. And it's gonna be up to them to decide, okay, I'm gonna forfeit my initial deposit and just move it along, or I'm gonna challenge this and we're both gonna be in court and you're not gonna sell your house and I'm not gonna buy a house. And that's really kind of where the attorneys come in. Is attorneys, if you involve them at any level, are always going to strongly encourage settling. They're never gonna try and push you to go to court as much as people I mean, maybe if you have a crappy attorney, but if you have a good attorney that you have a working, really good relationship with, a good attorney is going to discourage court. They're going to do their best to mediate it. So know that going into it. Don't be scared of Ron. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
But you're right, though. Most bills don't.
They don't. This is literally worst, absolute worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And you have to, and I have the conversations very upfront with my clients about, listen, your initial deposit, I like to keep it low because I've had somebody luckily in Massachusetts challenge it. And I was able to work it out and we were able to get our money back. But when I called the attorney, he said, just give them half the deposit. Give them half the deposit, move along. And I'm just not like that. It's a no for me, dog. We're gonna have to figure something else out. So what I did is I had my client file something in small claims court because the contract clearly stated that she could back out for any reason. And then they released the deposit. And what we requested for the home inspection, they ended up doing anyway. So it's just a complete waste of time. But you want to make sure you have these conversations about risk with your clients. I try to explain them without scaring them. And you'll find that, delicate pressure as you practice real estate. So I'll say, listen, I want to do like $1,000, no more than $2,000 based on your situation. Like if $5,000 isn't going to be, you're not going to blink about losing it and you really want this property, sure, we'll do 5,000, but just know that it's at risk.
So now, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So are you talking about the first deposit or the second?
Well, the initial deposit I have in the past, and I don't really kind of go for it anymore. I've gotten pressure to say I want more. Like, oh, seller's concerned about the initial deposit amount. It's like, oh, they are? No, they're not. You are. But I'll get pressure. And sometimes where this market is so buyer hungry, they're willing to bend more than they normally would. And it's important that you're there to remind them that this is at risk. If at a certain point there's a disagreement, there's no guarantee you're going to get your money back here because this is a contract that you're signing. So if you're okay with that and you're comfortable with that, we can do that. And of course, that is a worst case scenario situation. However, if this is going to affect your ability to buy something else, if this gets caught up in court, you want to think twice about that. Go, Sara, continue.
Well, I was just saying, I see a lot of deposits coming that are very low.
Yeah. And I prefer
As a
this.
seller representative, there's no reason to accept offers for deposits because there's not enough money to buy the buyer to take it.
Yes. And that's where
That happened up there. And why are agents still total deposits?
total deposit. So for oh, I have like 1 in 25 or like, so I'm like,
No, there's no way we're taking the home off the market for $20,000.
no. And I understand, and I do try my best because I think it can very easily become an us versus them mentality in both states, and it shouldn't be. I try to explain to them from the listing perspective. Well, listen, they're going to take their house off the market. You can only introduce your home to the market one time. I don't care what anyone says. When it goes back on, it's not going to hit like it did the first time. So maybe, but more than likely not. And so I try to explain to them, to my buyer, like, listen, if you can't afford, let's try and find a balance that works for everybody. Because what I would say to you, I would say, well, I understand that. However, my client's concerned because if this were, to go left and they were to be out for that deposit amount, it would prevent them from being able to buy something else.
Great.
That would be my response. And then if they really wanted the home, it's a worst case scenario. And I do try to tell them
How
that.
serious are they? See, here's the thing. We think that when they accepted a PNS with $2,500 down bound, that your buyer has stopped looking at homes. The sellers are concerned, well, they could walk away, $2,500.
Yeah.
They found something better.
In this market, though, they're not gonna.
People at the table.
Yeah.
That's why deposits need to be kept high.
And I think right now there's nothing for anyone to look at.
Correct. We're
So
deposits.
you're at a little bit of a less, I think that you're honestly more apt to get accepted at a lower amount up front because there's nothing to look at. It's like, yeah, realistically, it probably took you 2 years to get this, so good luck. So, but in a normal times, that's again, the negotiating you're gonna be dealing with, and it changes based on when you're, because if I'm a seller, I'm acting just like Ron, but if I'm a buyer, I'm like, no way.
In Massachusetts, unless there's a reason, it's 5%.
Yeah, I think in
And that's a
Mass.
reasonable amount to not walk away.
Sorry, my kids. No, I think that is reasonable. In Mass, we had like the specific situation. I know I don't want to get too lost on it, but the specific situation I had was it was $2,500 for the initial deposit. Second deposit, it was a first-time home buyer.
Right.
It was a first-time home buyer, and that's also something that I'm really sorry. No, leave me alone. I can't talk to you. Okay, so this specific instance was my client had gone to an open house, shared that her I guess it was the agent was her friend's dad or something. First time home buyer, and that's again too where you're gonna run into this deposit issue. If they're first time home buyer, realistically, and especially in New Hampshire, their closing costs are astronomically more money because of the tax cards. So you have to consider, and I do try to plead that, so if their offers being considered, listen, you know, they're a first time home buyer. They have to cover they're not asking to cover closing costs. Like they need to have enough money. Essentially, they're not going to have the cash that someone has from rolling equity over. And at a certain point, you do have to be realistic about what your client can actually do. And you have to be honest. And if it kills a deal, it kills a deal. You have to be looking out for your client, not your closing. And that's really kind of what it comes down to. You'd be super excited you got under contract and working with these people for 2 years and finally gonna get paid. But if it comes down to them saying, oh, well, we want your whole deposit up front because you're an FHA buyer, that's probably what they're going to have to do, but you want to make sure that risk is assessed and they understand it fully. Because if that is completely, I'm really sorry, that's my kid. If that deposit gets completely, you know, taken, they're not going to be able to buy anything. So I got a loss. The specific instance that I'm speaking of, they had discussed at the open house that they were with, he said, oh, there's some knob and tube wiring. She said, oh, my boyfriend's going to school to be an electrician. He can fix it. Shouldn't have said that. However, it's a discussion that they had. It had nothing to do at that point. He didn't even know if they were going to put an offer in. They put an offer in and there was a lot of knob and tube. And so I asked them, listen, can you take care of the knob and tube? Can we give us a credit so they can take care of it when they get in? They didn't understand what knob and tube even was, let alone the risk that comes with it. The home inspector, and the home inspector didn't scare them. He wasn't, it was just like, this is a lot. You know, you're definitely going to have, and it's covered with insulation. So you're going to have to deal with this as soon as you get in here. That's different than saying I have some knob and tube wiring. You have knob and tube wiring is covered with insulation, which is a totally different ballgame. So when I said, listen, she's backing out, we had negotiated for a little while and it just wasn't working out. And I said, listen, send the release. This is not working. We're not budging. Let us go. He said, no, I'm going to have my client seek counsel because they knew about the knob and tube. It didn't matter. In Mass, it just didn't matter. They might have had a little bit more of a chance in New Hampshire, but ultimately, in my opinion, I still think that my client would have got their money back, and they did. They ended up saying, oh, you know, we went for a few days and it was $2,500. And my client was like, I don't really care if I lose $2,500, but I'm pissed. So she filed a claim in small claims court and we sent the paperwork over to them and they immediately released the deposit. So you get into kind of hot situations like that, but it's not often. That's only happened to me one time in 7 years. So it's not like this is something that happens regularly, but our job is to guide them, and to guide them is to understand the risk that they're potentially putting themselves in. And there's going to be risk. And that's what you want. There's some clients that just kind of think too much. They get a little bit like, you know, like engineers like to read every line. They get real nervous. You kind of just have to say, listen, this process is going to have a risk. You know, the seller could die and feel like they decide not to sell the house. You know what I mean? Like anything could happen. So you really kind of have to just trust the process to a certain extent, understand that there's some risk, and just take it as it comes.
Are there any other inspections that you effectively add anything on that, or are there other ones that?
What you usually add what, sorry?
Can be, not under demo.
Honestly, no, I don't. That's a good one. See, this is where I learned. I've never added chimney. I kind of just do, if the client was like concerned about that and said, hey, you know, to have a discussion with me, I want to use this fireplace, I might then say you should have chimney guy come out because who knows when they use this. But it's really kind of tailored to each client. As far as the inspection goes in New Hampshire, it's really all on the buyer. It's at the buyer's, you know, discretion. It's at their cost. So, and I always tell them it's much better to spend now. So that's also an added cost in New Hampshire that is different. So in Mass, it might be like $400 for like a home inspection. In New Hampshire, it's going to be like closer to 8 or 9 because the septic inspection is something separate from the actual home inspection. And any additional inspection that they want is going to come at an additional cost to them. So then after we're happy with the home inspection, after we're happy with the home inspection. Oh, wait, sorry, continue. What did you say? Did you have?
Don't waste water.
Oh, no.
I think this one may have been,
And if there, yeah, if it's public, there is, so if you, that's another thing, I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot about that completely. In New Hampshire, there's a lot of well. So, and that's another important thing where you might want to get that inspected too, because wells dry up. And if you need to have a dried well, you have to drill a new well. And you can't always drill a new well. Sometimes there's no water left and then it becomes a major issue. So, and if there's no option to hook into the town. If it's town, so if it's town, if it's connected to it's in Manchester, it wouldn't
Just to
pertain.
be clear, this is just an example of a deal she did. This is
Yes.
Not guidance as to what.
No, this is just so that you can kind of see what this looks like on paper.
And they changed the amount that you can have of certain things in the water. So
Yeah.
The arsenic one is horrible. So
And if you have certain loans, they're gonna require them, like an FHA or a VA loan, they're gonna require a water test. And I've had situations where it's a new construction, you know, like, hey, it's gonna pop up with pre-construction, and they always do. So I had a VA loan in New Hampshire, in Sandown, New Hampshire. It was a one-off build. It wasn't like a development or anything. And usually when those are one-off builds, they leave some things unfinished so that the buyer, whoever buys it, can pick, you know, carpet, tile, whatever. So we were at that point, and and this is where it's important to have a very good lender, because the lender kind of waited till the last minute to, you know, I don't know, it just was a nightmare. I can't remember, it was years ago, so I can't remember. I just remember I wanted to kill the lender. So have a good lender that you trust. The VA test came back, that the VA water test came back that there was high levels of coliform, and then it didn't pass. So then it becomes a negotiation of, okay, well, whose responsibility is it to bleach? Is it mine because it's my well, or is it yours because your loan requires this? This was also in a much different market. It was in a market where buyers could throw their weight around a little bit more. Now it's like the buyer's paying for them. But then it was more of a topic of discussion where it was, you know, more fair. And then, so the tank was bleached, because when it's a new construction well, a lot of the time, if it sits, it's not an abnormal thing to happen, because no one's flushing the toilet, no one's doing anything, so the water's just sitting stagnant. So we thought, okay, we'll bleach it, it'll be fine, paid for it to have it bleached, have it done. Comes back, still coliform. And at this point, it's like, okay, well, is it on the buyer? Because we tested it, and then we paid for it, have it bleached, and we tested it again, it's still an issue. So then the seller, who is also the builder, because the builder had a real estate license, it got highly emotional. So these are all kind of things that, you know, they'll come up, it's on a case by case basis. If you have a conventional loan buyer, you're not going to run into this issue. If you, or unless they elect to have their well tested. In this market climate, more than likely, they're going to test, but for their own knowledge, so they know what they're getting into when they get in there, because it's very hard, especially if you have something, you know, if it's a good listing that's got a lot of action, which is like most of them. I have a listing right now in Hudson that is really not good, really not nice. And I have like 30 showings on it this week. So it's really not fair. Feel bad for the buyers. But so after we submit second deposit, this is usually at the point at which the lender would order the appraisal. However, because we're running into an appraisal issue and New Hampshire starts at purchase and sales, they might order that right when their offer is accepted, because the appraisals take a really long time. And before, it would take 2 weeks. You'd have someone come out relatively soon, right after the inspection. They do it. They get their report back in 2 weeks. Now it's like, we're like 2 days off from closing. It's the appraisal in. It's like, what's happening? So that's what we're running into here. Oh, no. Okay.
I just think that there are more appraisals up there than down here are coming in under.
Yeah, I think that like this particular instance, where we can go over it now that we're kind of on the topic. So this was a home that was on the market. It was on for $635. Beautiful, beautiful home. However, it's very custom. It's a ranch. A ranch is a ranch. Doesn't matter if it's a grand ranch, it's a ranch. That's it. I'm not going to comp that next to a colonial gym. It's not going to happen. So I knew that it was overpriced. My client knew that it was overpriced. And so I ran a market analysis before we submitted the offer. I saw the value was like in the 590-ish range, which is significantly under what it was listed for. I felt comfortable telling my client, let's give them asking, because we're keeping the financing contingency intact, and that covers the appraisal. And I got challenged. You know, I submitted the offer at $635. It was their asking. As soon as she starts talking to me, you'll kind of know when your offer is up there. They don't talk to you if it's not. So they called me. She started talking to me. She said, okay, what's up with appraisal? What language are you going to add about appraisal? I said, none. And she said, well, what do you mean? You have to add something. She's, 16% down. So they're probably not even going to care. And I said, oh no, if I'm going to add any language about the appraisal, it's going to be that it's subject to appraisal. So if you want, I can add that, but I don't think you want me to. So she, accepted the offer, and exactly what happened. This was a very weird instance too that you can run into. The appraisal came in at 597 initially. 597. Okay, so we negotiate. We got a price reduction to 605. My client was willing to come up with an extra like 10 grand cash, but again, she's a first-time home buyer who's putting 16% down and covering her closing costs. That's a lot of money on a property that is valued in almost $600,000. That's a lot of cash. She doesn't have any equity she's rolling over. This is just money she's saving. So that was my negotiation tactic. Listen, this is the first time home buyer. She doesn't have the money. If you want to put the house back on the market and explain why it's back on the market, you absolutely can. We'll just go find another house to buy. And obviously they didn't want to do that. So we did a price reduction to 605. And then the lender called me and said, Sarah, I'm so sorry. The underwriter said that the appraiser accidentally valued one of the bathrooms more than they should have. And it's actually $5,000 lower. So now my client's having to come up with an extra $5,000 of cash that she doesn't have. So I have to go back to the seller and say, hey, I know I just had you reduce your listing 40 G's, but like you want to reduce it a little more. And at that point, we worked something out and we were able to keep it together. We reduced the price to 601. So those kinds of things are also things you're going to run up against. And all of these are fixed with an addendum. And you can see them in that little packet you have, you know, each fix is an addendum, where in mass, you would negotiate. Sometimes it's you, sometimes it's the attorney. Sometimes the attorneys, you get emails that you're just copied on. The attorneys are doing all the negotiating. Some attorneys in mass want you to do it and just say, let me know what's happening and I'll write it in. So that's where the difference is in mass. In New Hampshire, there's no attorney involvement at this stage. This is all just you having to negotiate the purchase and sales agreement, where in mass, you'd have attorneys sending documents, redlining, accepting, signing. You know what I mean? And it's simpler, but it opens you to more risk. Because as these get more complex, you could be considered practicing law without a bar license. So you have to be, I would suggest, develop a relationship with an attorney, because I'll reach out to an attorney and say, listen, this is a situation. I don't know how to write this. Can you please send me some language? Oh yeah, no problem. Send me language. I copy it, paste it. And then if anyone comes back to me, I can say, this is the attorney that gave me this language. And I have it in an email, black and white. So that's what I would recommend you do. So after you kind of get through all of the hoops you have to jump through, in this specific instance, it was the home inspection, then it was the appraisal, and then it was the appraisal again. We get to the closing table. Another main difference in New Hampshire versus Mass is that there's no smoke certificate. So if you have a listing in Mass, you have to have a fire department come. They have to have, each town has different requirements. You want to get that ahead of time. Sometimes you hit every requirement and they still fail you. I don't know why. That happens all the time. And then your clients, and smoke detectors are a lot of money. When you have to do a whole home, it's like $500. So you want to make sure that you're preparing your client in Mass. But we're in New Hampshire now. I'm switching hats. Sorry. There's none of that. It's on the buyer. If the buyer wants new smokes, they're going to have to install them when they get in. But if they want it ahead of time, they can buy them and ask the seller to install them if they want. Probably not going to happen, but you can certainly ask. Does anyone have any questions? Where we're at? You're looking at me funny. I'm just kidding. Does anyone, nothing? Anyone? Okay. So this is during a normal transaction, because obviously if things get hot, if things get weird, if there's a disagreement about, deposit, or if things are starting to get yucky, it's looking like these people are going to hate each other and we're going to end up in court. The attorney, you should get your client an attorney. Also, when you're on the list side of, like, the buyer has a closing attorney to reference. And I think that's why I'm most comfortable working with buyers in New Hampshire, because they have that closing attorney that you can lean on a little bit to help you. Some attorneys are more willing to help you than others. Some attorneys in New Hampshire are like, that's not what I do. Figure it out. And that's why your network is important. It's important that you're constantly networking with people. When we have networking events in here, when Mitchell Wiseman's in here, have a conversation with him, because you want to be able to have a few attorneys. I know there's like 3 attorneys I could reach out to that would absolutely help me if I called them and would do me a favor, because attorneys bill by the minute. So you want to get someone that's going to build a relationship with you. And that means you need to add value to them, which means referring to clients, or, helping them if they have any questions about the value of a property or whatever. So in New Hampshire, attorneys are responsible for the title work and the closing process, period. That's all they do, nothing else. In Mass, the attorneys are responsible for writing and negotiating terms within the purchase and sales based on the contract to purchase that the realtor completes with the co-broke. They're also responsible for the title work and closing process. I've also found, mainly in New Hampshire, that if there's a title issue, they throw that on me. They want me doing the research. They're like, a lot of the time, they'll throw it on me and say, oh, well, whatever. I've actually had to tell an attorney, I don't have a bar license and I'm not paid to do this. You need to do it. And this is, again, where it's important that you're assertive, not disrespectful, but don't let people walk all over you, because they absolutely will. So you need to be assertive and you need to let them know, this is respectfully, I have no problem helping to get this deal to close. I'll do whatever I can. This is not my responsibility, though. Make it clear. Ultimately, I'm like the kind of person, I'll do anything to keep it together. So if the attorney's not doing their due diligence, in my opinion, I will usually get whatever information provided to them. And it's unfortunately happened. So maybe I should just be an attorney. No, I'm just kidding. But that's the key difference between, you know, Mass and New Hampshire as far as the attorneys go. Try not to be too scared. Oh, I lost track again. Sorry. So in New Hampshire, when they need to hire an attorney to do the deed as well, the deed work. So that's part of like the closing and stuff. So if you get them involved with an attorney from the jump on the seller side, say, listen, this is an attorney, you're going to need someone to write the deed for you. You could have them go through the closing attorney, but to me, it's well worth it. It's like $1,500. And if they're selling their home right now, it's usually like, okay, I think it's well worth the cost, because if things hit the fan, this person's already familiar with what's going on, you know, and they can kind of jump in and help me. And they're going to need to, because I'm only a realtor, I'm not an attorney. So I would try to get my listings, you know, anyone that I'm selling for involved with an attorney right around the time the offer is accepted. And then if I run into issues where it's, you know, the inspection or something like that, and it's looking like it's getting gross, I'm gonna pull them in and say, hey, like something's happening over here and I really need your help. And be assertive, be a nag. I'm naggy. If I need help, I'm like, listen, I know that this is New Hampshire, but I need help. So you need to help, because my clients paid you money, and you're gonna need help. Is there any is there any questions about that? I think it's pretty straightforward. So disclosure. This is a fun one. Another key difference between Mass and New Hampshire, I just keep writing things. Another key difference between Mass and New Hampshire as far as property disclosures go is, like in Mass, you can have them do a selling statement. That's optional. They don't have to. New Hampshire, you have to. With the signed offer, there needs to be this disclosure. There is an I don't know option, and it's a very popular option. A lot of people just don't know anything about this. But it's important, because I've had situations specifically. So in Derry, New Hampshire, I had a property go under contract. I was on the buyer side of things. I was a newer agent at the time. Otherwise, I probably would have advocated a little bit harder. They didn't want to pay up for a home inspection. They thought it was too expensive. They wanted to, their friend's dad was in construction. He's going to take a look at it for me. We're in there. My dad's also a contractor, so a little background. I know a little bit more than the average person about like the way things function in a home. And I saw there was fire damage. I saw there was a lot going on. And I just said, listen, it's well worth the money for the home inspection. But they said, no, not doing it. This is my dad's buddy. He knows what he's doing. We go through, everything's fine. Everything goes well. We get to the end of the transaction. Everything closes, good to go. 2 months later, I get a phone call. Hey, I just leaned on my wall and my whole arm went through it, because the room that I sleep in with my baby is full of black mold. And I found out when I was doing mold mitigation after the fact, the neighbor came over and said, oh, you're fixing that mold problem that they had, that my old neighbor had? And he was like, what do you mean? He said, oh yeah, they had an air conditioner that was over this flat roof that was dripping on the roof. The flat roof was probably a rubber roof, needed to be replaced. It caused a ton of mold. They knew about it and did not disclose it. So I put them in touch with an attorney. I had them, and they ended up getting some funds, some money. You know, they have to pay that out because they were dishonest on this. You know, if this is what's nice about New Hampshire and the disclosure is that your clients have something to reference if they lie. It's going to cost them money. They're going to have to pay for an attorney to go after the other people. But in a situation like that with mold, like they were.
Fraud would have to improve. Like,
well, the neighbor.
The neighbor.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
Well, honestly, that's for the attorneys too. So I try not to like get involved in that. I say, listen, sounds like they lied. So I'm going to put you in touch with an attorney, and the attorney can decide how to move forward from here. You sometimes, like, I will do an initial outreach. Like just recently in the last year, I sold a property, what town is it? In Alton, New Hampshire. And it was weird. It was a really nice house. It was like totally, a lot of acreage, but right behind them, there was a new build, and my clients wanted privacy. It was very important to them. They wanted to make sure that there was enough space between, you know, the lots. We went there a couple times. It was good. Everyone's good. Everyone's happy with where everything is. They move in. After the fact, the person that was building the home had the land surveyed and cut my client's yard. Like, I don't know. It was ridiculous. I mean, my client was exaggerating, but it was a lot. It was like clearly landscape stuff. So he calls me, and at this point, I'm also listing a home for him. So I've already sold him this property, and now I'm working on his listing, which was another whole other situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I have, I at that point call to the listing agent, and I say, hey, it says that, you know, sorry, backtrack. I have ADHD, so I get a little lost. My client, his neighbor comes over and says, hey, I want you to know you're parking your cars on my land and you need to stop. And my client said, what are you talking about? He said, I had a dispute with the prior owners. We had this surveyed. I told them this was mine. They disputed with me and then they sold their home. I didn't hear from them. He wasn't living there at the time because the home was under construction. So by the time he moved in, he said, you know, he had stakes in the ground. He had stakes put in from the survey. So I went back to the disclosure and saw that it said that it was surveyed, but it didn't say it was surveyed recently. So then I called the company that surveyed it. And then I called the company that did the initial survey when the house was built, you know, 15 years prior. And then I'm having to call, you know, my attorney friends to say, hey, at what point do I involve you?
I'm only doing this because.
Because I was
working with this person.
Because I'm listing. So
Because
if this
at
was a
point, you're
situation,
out of this transaction,
Exactly.
close this
I
deal.
will do them a favor. I'll call the listing agent and say, hey, this is what's up. Do they want to give us some money before the attorneys get involved? Because he's definitely coming after you for the attorney. Sometimes they don't want to deal with that, but either way, I did the initial outreach because I was currently listing a property for him. So I was all, and there was EPA was involved in the listing. It was like a whole other thing. And so in that specific instance, you can involve yourself to whatever degree you feel comfortable. It depends. It depends on the client for me. If they're reasonable and I feel comfortable doing an initial outreach to try and patch things together, I will. But there are certain clients you're like, you know, I'm just going to refer you to this attorney because this is exhausting for me.
That's a wise statement.
Yeah.
To an attorney. I had a similar situation where I helped a buyer buy a for sale by owner. The builder was selling it by himself.
Yeah.
So we met with the builder to see the property. And he makes the statement, all this back here is conservation. Don't worry. So
No
so
one's
and
going to
so
build
on, so
anything.
whatever, you know, yeah, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I said to my client, I said, now look, I said, you know, you made that statement, don't guarantee it, but, you know, look up ownership of that parcel. And it was owned by Richardson Ice Cream. They
Oh,
own this big part of land back here. And she really liked this property because of that nature effect, you know. And sure enough, right after she moved in, maybe 6 months, that land got sold.
bulldozed.
All those trees came down. And she calls me up like, all the, you know, he said, blah, 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 what do we do, yada, yada, can you help us? And I'm like, well, I can't help you put the trees back. I mean, the trees are
Yeah,
gone. So it's not
no.
gonna
Do you want me to
happen.
sell the house again?
I said, your best bet is to call an attorney if you feel that, you know, something
Yeah.
like that happened. I go, I absolutely can say that to you. You know, just so I can back you up on that, but there's nothing I can do. A realtor, there's nothing I can do about that. So
I will touch
you have
base
to
with
call an attorney.
Yeah.
See what can happen.
I'll have an initial conversation with the co-bro, honestly, because I do
It
value.
was not. It was the.
Yes,
the
where
record
it's for
selling
sale by
by
owner.
itself.
If it was a for sale by owner, I would have gone with an attorney. But where I had I value my relationship with the co-bros, especially just because I really am a believer in we're a team, just like I'm a team with my client, we're a team, we're just trying to get it done. And so I wanted to give her a heads up because if there was some sort of misunderstanding, or maybe she said, oh, no, I have a copy of the survey here, I kind of wanted to get her 2 cents. But obviously, as it gets thicker and thicker, and you're like, this is not getting any more simple, you have to involve an attorney.
I was just gonna ask your opinion on I had one in New Hampshire where it was in the winter.
Mhm.
And they had put, when we got there for the home inspection, they had put a sump pump in a ditch right outside the garage and ran a blue hose. Yeah, even though there was snow everywhere.
Yeah.
And they said it was just full disclosure that that's what this thing was for, and they would leave it, but they never use it.
Oh, I'm sure they never
And,
use it.
and they also had online that there was a cease and desist from one time, that there was an automatic pump that pumped up the street, but it ran down the street, someone down the street complained.
Yeah, it's illegal, yeah.
And there was a cease and desist, so this is what they normally would use after that, but they never used it. The buyers move in and it's flooded.
Right.
Like, flood, spring comes, snow melts, so much water, you're coming out, it wasn't going into the house.
Yeah,
but
it's like, I actually had a property.
And what do you,
like
like, what do you do then? Because they suppose, theoretically, they disclosed and yet they said they never used it.
I would say you did not disclose the severity appropriately. And I think that's where the attorney comes in. Like, it's up for us to say, like, you know, if I feel as though, like, if I think my client doesn't have a shot and they're being unrealistic, I'm going to tell them, I'm going to say, listen, you can